Smash Ultimate is a game that claims to have every Smash character that has ever come out, which is kind of why it's called Smash Ultimate, except that it kind of doesn't. Super Smash Bros. Is a series that has come out with 5 games so far. Well, I guess like technically 6, but that one doesn't really count. And even though some characters were cut along the way, for the most part, once a character was released, they made their way into the next game in the series. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that they appeared the same in that next game. Naturally, with any game that has any form of a competitive scene, there's typically going to be balance patches to make sure that the game can still be competitive long term. A good example of this is Bayonetta, a character that was released towards the end of Smash 4's lifespan. And when she first released, she was kind of broken because she could do stuff like this.
That dab kick, that could have been it. Uh-oh. Calling Mr. R because he better be mashing that R button, taking him all the way to the side, and that's gonna do it. Pick fresh beats, Mr. R.
So, naturally they decided to nerf her a little bit, but then she could still do stuff like this.
That air dodge, here it is right now, one stock apiece, but we have Captain Zack in a situation where he's at high percent. But the rage, the rage, and he's, oh my God.
So at that point, they were like, yeah, we're kind of done patching this game, so go do whatever until we're ready to drop Ultimate. Each game in the series kind of has their one character that broke the game because of how much better they were than the rest of the cast. And if you really take a look at it, there's pretty much a common theme around every time a new game gets released. Starting off with Smash 64, Pikachu and Kirby, yeah, they're kind of busted, so let's go ahead and nerf them to the ground for Melee. And now that we're at Melee, Fox is a pretty good character. Puff, kind of up there, but for Brawl, yeah, they're not going to be up there. Wait a second, we're in Brawl and Meta Knight just won another tournament. Dedede keeps chain grabbing people. Yeah, we're going to make sure that doesn't happen. Or what about Smash 4, a game that's actually pretty balanced overall, I would say, when it first dropped, but then again, we had to add Bayonetta and Evo 2018, we really don't want to repeat that again. So Bayonetta, we're going to make you a lot worse than Smash Ultimate. My point is, for the most part, we've seen the top characters of their games significantly fall down whenever the next game is released. And that being said, there is one more pattern that I've noticed with these characters. Sure, all these characters have received nerfs over the years, whether it's having certain moves do less damage or less knockback, a game engine favoring a completely different style of play, or just by adding more characters that completely counter them in newer games. But the other common pattern that I'm talking about here is the fact that most of these characters have remained fundamentally the same. And by that I mean their actual movesets haven't changed drastically like some other characters. The only exception here might be Meta Knight, which I'll talk about in a minute, but for the most part, this handful of characters have had the same moveset across all games, with maybe a couple of moves changing like Kirby's dash attack. For example, if I'm somebody that played Fox as a kid in Melee and I've never touched a Smash game since then, and I just decided to sit down, play some Smash Ultimate and pick Fox because that's what I grew up with, I would be like, you know what, this character kind of feels the same, like I remember it being like this. Now all that being said, Smash Ultimate's roster today has like 90 characters and the majority of them have appeared in at least one other Smash title. So naturally, over the course of many decades, some things are bound to change, which means that some of the characters in this roster look almost nothing like they used to in the past. Brawl Pit is one of the first characters that comes to my mind when I think of characters that are completely different from how they were introduced. I'd say in general, Brawl had a bunch of characters that received at least a couple of changes by the time they got to Ultimate, but Pit definitely got more than others. When Brawl was originally released, there was really only a couple of Kid Icarus games that had ever released, so there wasn't a whole lot to base Pit's moveset off of. His side special was of course the classic Hi-Ya-Ya-Ya, until it was changed in Smash 4 to what it currently looks like today. Today, Pit's side special is the Upper Dash Arm, which is a weapon that was featured in Kid Icarus Uprising, a game that came out between Brawl and Smash 4's release. Pit's up special was also different because it basically gave you the power of flight instead of just sending you in one direction. Not only that, but if you used all of his jumps, he would actually start to glide around the map. And lastly, Pit also had his down special changed for the better, I would say, because it originally was just a shield that faced in one direction. But now it's of course the Guardian Orbiters, which again were introduced in Kid Icarus Uprising. Like many other characters in Brawl, Pit also had a bunch of his basic moves changed, but for the most part, a lot of his attacks and aerials are pretty similar to how they appeared back in Brawl. And since we're on the topic of Brawl, let's go ahead and talk about another character that was introduced back then, and it's one of my personal favorites, and that of course is Olimar. Right off the bat, you'll notice that Olimar had a few more friends back then instead of just having 3, and having them appear in a random order justifies this character making the list. If you think Olimar is campy now, just be lucky you didn't play Brawl, because this is one of those characters that could completely shut down characters in certain matchups. Olimar's actual moveset isn't insanely different from how it appeared in Brawl, but there definitely are a few exceptions, including some aerial animation changes, and then stuff like jab and forward tilt changing. But again, having 7 Pikmin instead of 3 is a big change in my opinion. The one move that was significantly different for Olimar was his up B back then, then because flying Pikmin did not exist yet. Instead, your ability to recover was entirely based on how many Pikmin you had with you. Oh yeah, and it was also a pretty cool option to take stocks. So now that we've talked about a couple of characters that a lot of people might not have known about if they never played Brawl before, let's talk about a few characters that are a little more obviously different from how they used to be. And of course, I'm talking about our favorite combination characters, which include Zelda and Sheik and Samus and ZSS. Zelda and Sheik were introduced back in Melee as a 2-in-1 package, and for the most part, their moveset has held up throughout the years. You might be wondering though, how were you able to switch between these characters? And the answer to that is simple: down special. That's right, instead of having Bouncing Fish or the Shadow Knight, you were able to switch characters mid-match. And while this sounds really cool, it's truly a shame that Zelda was so awful back in Melee and in Brawl, to the point that you really had no reason to play her at all. Zelda's best move back in those games was actually down special. Meanwhile, ZSS and Samus worked a little bit different. Samus, of course, is a character that was introduced back in Smash 64, and ZSS was introduced in Brawl. And even though you can't see her on the character select screen, you can still select her by holding L and R when you selected Samus on the character select screen. Now, how was ZSS different back then, you might ask? Well, the second that the match started, you basically got a handful of items delivered to you because you would spawn with pieces of Samus's armor around you. And that's actually one of the things that made her a viable character back then. Another big change from her moveset was her up special, which was essentially a vertical tethergraph. And it started to seem like everyone had one of those back then, including Ivysaur, who was never a standalone character, but the character he was part of, Pokemon Trainer, definitely has received some big changes. To start off, Pokemon Trainer was a character that used to have a stamina meter, and this was basically a mechanic that weakened every Pokemon the more that you used them in battle. And yes, I know it sounds terrible, and that's because it was. In general, each of the Pokemon had some of their moves changed from Brawl, but I would say mostly for the better considering how Pokemon Trainer is able to function today in Ultimate. One move that I did kind of like back then was Charizard's forward air, which had this like fire effect to it, and I thought it was pretty cool. But his forward air today is also good. Oh yeah, and Charizard also didn't have Flare Blitz back in Brawl, and instead he had Rock Smash as his side special. And later on in Smash 4, that would be changed to his down special because of course Charizard was a standalone character in that game. And I guess that right there is technically a character we didn't see in Smash Ultimate because he's part of Pokemon Trainer now, and we don't see Charizard as a standalone anymore. Before we get to the last character that I really want to mention, I do want to give a few honorable shoutouts to some characters that have pretty much held up throughout the years, but they did receive some changes to the moveset. Starting off with Diddy Kong, who pretty much has the same moveset that he had back in Brawl, except back then he had 2 bananas, which allowed you to do stuff like this. Then of course there's Game & Watch's old forward air, the classic credit card, a very solid move that I actually kind of miss. Again, his forward air now is like different, but it's still very good. This is one that I completely forgot about, but Snake's down smash back in Brawl planted a Claymore in the ground and just gave him another explosive like he didn't need anymore. I should probably go into more depth for this one, but Link of course has received some big changes over the years, considering that we now have the Breath of the Wild Link, which got rid of his Gale Boomerang, his old bombs, and his Telegraph. But again, there's like 3 Links now, so I'd say this is a pretty good change. And then of course there's Bowser's side special for Melee that changed, and it was basically like another grab for him, and if you weren't close enough, it would actually basically just hit them as an attack. And the last honorable mention before we get into the very last character is of course Meta Knight. Don't worry, I did not forget. I know I mentioned earlier in the video I would come back to him, and that's exactly what I'm doing. This character might as well have gotten a completely different moveset with how hard he got nerfed from Brawl, but in reality the main change to his moveset was his up special, which was the shuttle loop. This allowed you to glide all across the stage in crazy ways, basically allowing you to do whatever and just kind of live off stage. Okay, now that we got all of those out the way, it's time to talk about the last character on my list, and trust me, this is totally not a biased pick. Alright, hear me out. I feel like Dedede has actually changed quite a bit since he was introduced. Just like a lot of the other characters I mentioned, Dedede had some of his basic moves changed, but I feel like for him there were a lot that was changed. His back air was one of his best moves back in Brawl, and it's kind of sad that they took it away from him. His down air spun the hammer around instead of spiking, which was kind of bad back then I feel like, and his down tilt was also changed to his new down tilt now, which in my opinion suits him better as well. Another move that changed for the better was Dedede's up special, which is pretty much the same, except back then it did not grab the ledge. His neutral special is also better than it was in Brawl, because back then you would just swallow projectiles and now you could shoot them back out. But the one move that really changed Dedede from the character that we knew back in Brawl was his side special. Instead of being able to Gordo spam like you can do today, Brawl Dedede would randomly throw out Waddle Dees, Waddle Doos, and Gordos. Each of these had their pros and cons, but for the most part, having that RNG for a projectile like this kind of benefited Dedede. And as somebody that really wanted to see Bandana Waddle Dee make it into Smash, it makes me sad that we didn't get Bandana Waddle Dee, and it makes me even more sad that we got rid of just regular Waddle Dees in general. It just took it out of Dedede's side special entirely. And as a whole, Dedede just kind of got a lot worse after Brawl, and I feel like a lot of that has to do with how different some of his moves are today. I do want to go ahead and close this video out by mentioning that I know I didn't cover every single character that has received a change in their moveset, like Peach being able to pull out the beam sword, or Mario's down air changing, or Ganon having a sword in his moveset now. I just wanted to cover some of the characters that I personally thought received some of the biggest changes over the years. If you really want me to dive into all the changes throughout the series, let me know in the comments below, and maybe I'll break it down by each individual game and kind of, go over each individual character. That way we can kind of cover everything that's happened over the series. Thank you all for watching the video. video. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I haven't had as much time lately to upload as much as I would like, but I'm still working on getting good quality videos out there. So if you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe and like the video. I've got other videos in this kind of style where I break things down in the past, and if you like that kind of content, I'll have them up on the screen for you, so definitely check those out. Hope you guys have a great day. If you're watching this before Thanksgiving, have a happy Thanksgiving, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.